Hello, hello, fellow cryptos. This is your host, Maddie, here with our very first episode of Cryptid Cove, a podcast that I've decided to start out of my dorm room because why not? After all, most cryptids wouldn't be found if it weren't for spontaneity, am I right? In this podcast, we'll get into the grimdark and gritty, the cool and creepy, the weird and wacky world of species we don't even know exist yet. But I believe they're out there, and with luck and time, hopefully you will too. I mean, after all, maybe they're listening right now. That said, let's get cryptic. Our first journey takes us to my home state, a place I'm certain my mom wishes I'd visit more often. I'm talking, of course, about Maryland. More importantly, I'm talking about Frederick County. And if you haven't heard of that place before, now you're gonna know a sweet little piece of information after this. And before you ask, no, Maryland's cryptid is not a giant crab. I have to repeat this because our personality trait is not a giant crab. I'm not being paid to say this also. Like, we like Old Bay, sure, but we're not like, oh, crab obsessed, though it seems like we are. In fact, our trip today doesn't even involve water. So hold on to your hats. And maybe your children and pets. Haven't figured it out yet? It's the Snallyghaster. Quite possibly one of the weirdest cryptids out there. And I think a fitting cryptid for our first episode. So the word Snallyghaster is not something I made up off the top of my head. I promise. Rather, it's derived from a mispronunciation of the German term Schnellergeist, which means quick spirit, which is also a little odd given the Snallyghaster isn't a spirit. It's like some freaky chimera mutant combo of a reptile and a bird. It also has tentacles, but we'll get more into that later. But I won't doubt them when they say it's quick. If you were a Maryland settler in the 1700s, you definitely wouldn't want to be at the receiving end of this bad boy. Or a giant crab, for that matter. Actually, what am I saying? Because you would not want to be on the receiving end of a Snallygaster regardless of what time period you're in. Those guys are vicious. So, as with many cryptids, there is no photographic evidence one exists. Oh, surprise, surprise. It kind of first appeared in the 1700s, and I'm pretty sure cameras didn't exist then. If they did, they were those weird box cameras. But weirdly enough, the Snallygaster reappeared in the early 1900s, around the time there were cameras. This was also around the time of the Prohibition. Y'all remember that, right? Alcohol was banned for a while, there were speakeasies, people got mad. Well, yeah, people didn't like that the Prohibition was going on, so there's actually a lot of theories and rumors that people were pretending to be Snallygasters to scare away law enforcement and alcohol revenue collectors. For those of you who don't know what those are, I also don't know. I theorize the Snallygaster was actually really mad about the Prohibition, but what can I say? Oh, right, this is my podcast. I can say whatever I want. I'm supposed to say stuff. But back to the topic at hand, the Snallygaster. It is, like I said, half reptile, half bird. In fact, a lot of people consider it one of the first dragons. Like I said, it has blood-sucking tentacles, which is a pretty cool quirk. Not for the person on the receiving end of it, but for the Snallygaster, that's pretty cool. The Snallygaster usually spirits away children or livestock, so there's a lot of stories about how it's like how children have gone missing, how farmers' livestock have gone missing, how they found like whole farms of animals missing. But there's also a lot of stories about how it's taken away grown adults and drained them of all their blood, leaving them scorched on someone's yard. So before I continue, I have to ask, did y'all grow up with that you've been booed thing? Where like they put the little paper ghost on your door and it's like, you've been booed, put this on someone's door. Yeah, it's kind of like that, but it's more morbid. More bid, if you will. Sorry, I like to make puns, as you'll come to realize over the course of this podcast. The Snallygaster has actually incited a lot of media panic in the past. So supposedly National Geographic wanted to catch it on video. Like, one of the Roosevelt presidents volunteered to go hunt it down. Obviously, he was unsuccessful. Because personally, if you ask me, the Snallygaster should be our national animal instead of the eagle. But anyways, both the Baltimore Sun and Washington Post have written articles about the Snallygaster in the past. And the Baltimore Sun actually said, oh, don't worry, we found its deceased corpse. But supposedly it had drank an entire vat of alcohol at a distillery, and it drunk itself to death. But also there was a very shadowy picture, so this kind of reassured some people, but not quite. So, for all we know, the Snallyghaster is supposedly dead. So no worries, folks. Or are there? See, in the very early 1900s, a few men found an egg the size of a barrel, which, if you have never seen a barrel before, is pretty big, about the size of your average trash can. Or middle schooler. A few more eggs were found too, but we're talking about this egg right now. So the suspected lifespan of the Snallyghaster is about 20 years, which is a little odd. You'd think a venomous, blood-sucking lizard bird would have a longer lifespan, given it's a venomous, blood-sucking lizard bird with tentacles. You'd think it would live a lot longer, given it has all the capacity of a predator, and some predators, like the Greenland shark, can live up to 400 years. Also, because this raises more questions, where are they living? Wouldn't we be finding more Snallyghaster corpses everywhere? Especially because they're supposed to live in the Appalachian Mountains and the South Mountains of Maryland. But we'll get back to that. Anyways, the lifespan is 20 years. And it never got to go to college. Poor Snally Jr., all alone in the world. But this raises some more questions. So, is the Snallyghaster a singular species? Is it capable of fertilizing eggs without a mate? Or are these eggs sitting out there, waiting to hatch and consume us all, like some sort of weird reverse omelet? There's a lot more theories about the Snallyghaster too. Supposedly, the first footprints were found in New Jersey, which is not Maryland for those out there. So a lot of rumors did circulate it was the Jersey Devil. But we'll talk about that guy next week. Are those spoilers? Maybe. So the Snallyghaster is actually one of few cryptids that have an arch nemesis too. The Dwayyo is a wolf-dog thing that is also in the same area as the Snallyghaster, and there's been rumors and sightings over the course of history that they've been violently fighting since settlers first settled. But we'll also talk about the Dwayyo too, because boy do I have theories about that guy. Anyways, let's get back to the Snallyghaster, the point of our podcast. Like I said, the Snallyghaster is usually depicted as a big bird with feathery, small wings. Which is weird because you'd think a creature of that size would have a much larger wingspan. So maybe this suggests that over time it's lost the ability to fly because it has other means of being a predator, like its tentacles, and there's some rumors it can spit blood or venom. So other stories usually say, there's a common variation in stories. They all say that the Snallyghaster usually smells like sulfur and has a shrill humanoid screech, kinda like me, like a locomotive or a train whistle, and it lives in caves near Frederick County, which is in Maryland. I grew up in Montgomery County, but it's still about 30 minutes away. So the sightings first began in 1909, and people were printing stories saying people had met with the Snallyghaster. There was another story about a guy who was killed and captured by the Snallyghaster, which tied into a lot of lore that the Snallyghaster was kidnapping children and animals. There have been sightings in New Jersey, like I said, where they found the footprints, but there have also been sightings in West Virginia and Ohio as well, so kind of following the Appalachian Mountain Trail. So while the sightings didn't last long, the Snallyghaster was reappearing in the same place 23 years later, where they found the egg. And back to media representation, the Smithsonian wanted proof that the Snallyghaster existed, and it was Theodore Roosevelt that supposedly offered to catch it. But these were fake, and they had ended up being invented by some journalists who were using Jersey Devil encounters in German folklore. Like I said, Snellyrgeist is the origin for the word Snallyghaster. So, unlike other cryptids, there's a lot of theories about it. So, as we'll talk about over time, a lot of people have suspected that cryptids like Mothman and the Jersey Devil are really this type of bird called the sandhill crane. In fact, there's a lot of theories that all cryptids tie back to the sandhill crane. But a man in Cumberland did see a Snallyghaster lay a very large egg, and later on in the 1930s, lumberjacks saw an egg big enough to hatch a horse, which isn't the size of a barrel, but we're led to assume that the Snallyghaster egg is pretty large. So there's a lot of theories. People think it might be a pterodactyl. Oh, did I just pronounce that wrong? People think it might be a pterodactyl that never went extinct, which kind of lines up with the razor shark beak and claws, as well as the half-bird lizard theme. So it's possible that it's a snallygat. Oh my goodness. It's possible that it's a pterodactyl, or like a seagull or a pelican, like that had picked up a squid out of the water and was flying away with it, which might explain the tentacles and the assumption, oh, it's kidnapping small animals. There's other theories that some people think that the Snallyghaster is the embodiment of a Native American creature called a piasa, as there are a lot of similarities, such as the loud screams and razor-sharp features. Needless to say, the Snallyghaster is getting pretty popular. There's a festival in Maryland named after it, which probably ties into the whole Prohibition era sightings and the fact that it apparently drank itself to death in a distillery. There's also a band called the Snallyghasters, and it's been pretty popular in some video games, appearing in Fallout 76. So even if you haven't heard of it, there's still a chance you've encountered it in media. It's a very cool cryptid, personally. I hadn't heard about it till a few years ago, but then again, in Maryland, you don't really get a lot of cryptids. We have our traditional Dogman and Bigfoot sightings, but it's kind of nice to have something of our own, you know? And actually, we'll be talking about a few more cryptid sightings that have been in Maryland. Over the summer, I went cryptid hunting with a few of my friends out for fun, and honestly, I recommend it if you haven't, even if you don't believe, just hanging out with friends and looking for stuff that doesn't exist, it's a special memory. But yeah, so in a way, cryptids bring us all together. Very metaphysical, if you ask me. Anyways, thank you all for tuning in to my very first episode. I apologize it was a little short, and I apologize for all the stutters, but hopefully we'll have more fun next time. Catch you later, cryptos, and remember, stay safe out there.